Didn't check my phone. I should have. But I was 63 years old and I slept with the ringer off because the world had finally, after decades of noise, gone quiet enough for me to rest. It was my son-in-law's mother who woke me up. Not literally. It was my daughter's voice in a voicemail I found at 2047 in the morning when I stumbled to the bathroom and saw the screen glowing on the nightstand. Dad. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, like she was afraid of being heard. Dad, please. I need you to come get me. I can't explain right now. Just come. Please. That was it. 11 seconds. I called back immediately. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called again. Same thing. I texted, I'm coming. Where are you? The 2 little check marks appeared. She had seen it. She didn't reply. I didn't call the police. I know that's the first thing people say afterward. Why didn't you call 911? And I've asked myself that 1,000 times since. But in that moment, at 2047 in the morning, with my heart hammering and my hands already shaking, the only thought I had was, my daughter needs me. Everything else left the building. 63 years of rational thinking, gone. I grabbed my keys, my jacket off the hook by the door, and I drove. My daughter had been married to her husband for 4 years. His name was Donovan. He was 31, worked in finance downtown, wore the kind of shoes that cost more than my first car payment. He wasn't a bad-looking man. He had the kind of face that photographs well, square jaw, easy smile, the sort of confidence that comes from never once doubting that rooms were built for him to walk into. I had tried, genuinely tried, to like him. My daughter loved him. That had been enough for me. His parents lived 40 minutes from my house in a suburb that had the kind of manicured lawns where nothing ever looked like it had actually grown naturally. It all looked purchased. Even the trees looked like they'd been delivered. His father was a retired district judge. His mother, her name was Vera, was the kind of woman who could deliver an insult in the same breath as a compliment, and you'd be 3 days away from the conversation before you realized what had happened to you. I had driven to that house exactly once before, for a Sunday dinner, 2 years ago. I remembered the turn off the highway, the stone columns at the entrance of the development, the cul-de-sac where their house sat at the far end like it was holding court. I made it there in 34 minutes. Every light in the house was off, except one window upstairs. I sat in the car for maybe 10 seconds. That's all. Then I walked up the front path and knocked. Nothing. I knocked again, harder. The porch light came on. A pause. Then the door opened about 6 inches, and Vera was standing there in a silk robe, her hair perfectly composed even at that hour. I don't know how that was possible, but it was. And she looked at me with an expression that was more bored than surprised. It's 3 in the morning, she said. My daughter called me, I said. She asked me to come get her. I need to see her. Vera tilted her head slightly. She's sleeping. She called me 20 minutes ago, I said. She left me a voicemail. She was frightened. She's been under stress, Vera said. She took a sleeping pill. She's fine. I'd like to see for myself. She's fine, Vera said it the exact same way as the first time. Flat, certain, final. Like the subject was closed. She's not a child. She doesn't need to be picked up in the middle of the night by her father. I looked at that 6-inch gap in the door. Behind her, the house was dark and quiet. I said, I'm not leaving without seeing my daughter. Vera looked at me the way she might look at a salesman who had rung the bell at a bad time. I think you should go home, she said. You're upset. That's understandable. But you're not coming in here and disturbing this household because you're anxious. Where is she? Sleeping, I told you. Then wake her up. Let me talk to her for 1 minute. No, she said it without any heat. Just no, like she was declining a second helping of something at dinner. Good night. And she started to close the door. I put my hand on it. I'm not a large man. I'm 5'11", maybe 180 pounds, and I had a lower back surgery 3 years ago that took some of the certainty out of my posture. But I put my hand on that door and I held it. I will stand on this porch all night, I said. And in the morning when the sun comes up and your neighbors are walking their dogs, I will still be standing here. Or you can let me see my daughter right now. Those are the two options. Vera stared at me. Her jaw tightened. Something moved behind her eyes. Not fear, not exactly. More like recalculation. She opened the door wider. She's upstairs. Second door on the left. You can check on her. You have 5 minutes. I walked past her into the house. The stairs were carpeted. It was so quiet I could hear my own breathing. Second door on the left. I knocked softly and opened it. The room was dark. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust. She was in the bed on top of the covers, still fully dressed. That's the detail that stopped my heart. Fully dressed. Jeans, a sweater, socks. Her phone was clutched in her hand even in sleep, or what looked like sleep. I crossed the room and touched her shoulder. Sweetheart. She didn't move. I touched her face. It was warm. Too warm. And that's when I turned the lamp on and saw the bruising along her left cheekbone. Dark purple-yellow at the center, spreading like something that had been there at least a day. Her lip was split, dried at the corner. There was a mark on her neck I couldn't look at for long without my vision going sideways. I shook her again, harder. Wake up, I'm here. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused, and when they finally found my face, she started crying. Not loudly. Silently. Just tears running down her face while she looked at me. Dad, she said. Her voice was thick. She took my phone after I called you. I only had it back because she forgot. She stopped. He's not here. He went. Donovan left yesterday. Who did this to you? She didn't answer. She just looked at me. Can you walk? She nodded. Then we're leaving. I got her up off the bed. She was unsteady, leaning into me, and I realized whatever she had been given, whether it was a sleeping pill or something else, she wasn't fully present. I got her arm over my shoulder and we walked to the door. Vera was in the hallway. She had changed in the 4 minutes I'd been in that room. She was fully dressed now, and behind her, coming up the stairs, was a man I didn't recognize. Tall, sport coat, the unhurried movement of someone who had been called and had taken his time getting there. You're not taking her anywhere, Vera said. She's injured, I said. She needs a hospital. She fell. She told me herself she fell. Look at her face. She fell down the stairs 2 days ago. Ask her yourself. My daughter said nothing. She was pressed against my side, looking at the floor. Move, I said to Vera. You're trespassing, the man behind her said. This is private property. You forced your way into a private residence. I was let in. You were told to leave. You're still here. That's a different story. I looked at my daughter. She was shaking. I looked back at Vera, who was watching me with an expression of absolute composure, and I understood, in a way I hadn't fully understood yet, that this had been arranged. The open door. The 5 minutes. Possibly even the phone left within reach. This was a woman who thought 3 steps ahead and had been thinking for a while. I said, she is leaving with me. If you want to stop me, call the police. Already done, the man said. The police arrived 7 minutes later. 2 officers, a man and a woman, both young enough to make me feel ancient. They were professional, calm. They spoke to Vera first, then to me, then, briefly, while I stood at the end of the hall, to my daughter. I watched from 20 feet away. I could see her face but not hear the words. I watched her shake her head once, twice. I watched one of the officers write something down. Then they walked back to me. The male officer said my daughter had confirmed she fell down the stairs. She said she had called me because she was scared, but that it was an accident. She said she did not want to leave. I said, look at the bruising. Look at the pattern of it. He said, sir, she's an adult. She has the right to make her own choices. I said, she's been given something. She's not coherent. He said, she seems coherent to me. I said, I want to speak to her alone. He said, she doesn't want that. I stood there. I could see my daughter at the far end of the hall, Vera's hand on her shoulder, not gripping, just resting there, just reminding. I left. I drove to the end of the block, and I sat in my car, and I put my head down on the steering wheel, and I stayed that way for what might have been 5 minutes or 20. I didn't cry. I wanted to. I couldn't. Then I started the car and drove to the emergency room at Mercy Regional, 8 miles away, because I didn't know what else to do and I needed to be somewhere with lights on. I sat in the waiting room for 2 hours. I drank 3 cups of bad coffee from a machine in the corner. Around 6 in the morning, I called my daughter again. Voicemail. I left a message. I said, "I'm not angry. I'm not going anywhere. Whenever you're ready, wherever you are, I will come." I said, "I love you." I said, "I saw your face." Then I called my younger brother, who had retired from practicing family law in Columbus 3 years ago and had since taken up woodworking with an intensity that worried his wife. I called him at 6:17 in the morning and he answered on the second ring because he had always been that way. The kind of person who answers. I told him everything. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Don't go back to that house." I said, "I know." He said, "Don't talk to the police again without someone there." I said, "I know." He said, "Are you listening to me? Because you don't sound like you're listening to me." I said, "I heard every word." He said, "I'm going to call someone. Give me until noon." His someone turned out to be a woman named Aldrich, a domestic violence and family law attorney in Cincinnati, who had a reputation that apparently preceded her considerably, at least in my brother's circles. She called me at 11:40. She was brisk and precise and asked me 14 questions in the time it would have taken most people to ask 4. She told me what I had and hadn't done correctly. The not correctly list was longer, but she said it wasn't irreparable. She also told me something I hadn't known. My son-in-law's father, the retired judge, had connections to a county family court magistrate who had, in the past 2 years, handled 2 cases that bore some resemblance to the pattern she was hearing. She said, "They know how to do this. The question is whether you're going to figure out how to do it better." I said, "Tell me how." The next 14 days were not dramatic in the way I expected. There were no confrontations, no scenes. There were phone calls, documents, a meeting in a law office on the 4th floor of a building downtown where I signed my name 11 times. There was a wellness check I requested through a different jurisdiction that yielded, on its second attempt, a brief phone call between my daughter and a social worker. There was a medical advocate who knew how to ask the kind of questions that led somewhere. My son-in-law came back from wherever he had been. I didn't know that until my daughter called me. Not at 2 a.m. this time. At 4 in the afternoon on a Wednesday. She called and she said, "Dad, I need to talk to you." Her voice was different, clearer. We met at a diner in a town neither of us lived in, equidistant from both our homes, at a booth in the back. She had makeup on. Not to look nice, to cover. I could still see it under the foundation, the yellowing edge of what had been on her cheekbone, but she sat across from me and she was present in a way she hadn't been in months, maybe longer. She told me things I won't repeat here, not because they aren't true, but because they are hers to carry, not mine to display. What I will say is that it had been more than 2 years, that it had started quietly, the way these things apparently do. A comment here, an isolation there. The gradual convincing of a person that the world outside is dangerous and only one person can be trusted. And then it had stopped being quiet. She said, "I know you think I should have called you sooner." I said, "I think nothing. I'm just here." She looked at her coffee. She watched me all the time. Vera, when he was traveling, she would sit in that house with me like she was keeping me there, not with a lock, just there, present. Watching. I said, "You don't have to go back." She looked up. "He says if I leave, he'll make sure I get nothing. He says his father knows everyone. He says." She stopped. "He says a lot of things." I said, "Let me tell you what my attorney says." Donovan's father did know people. He had called in something at the county level that briefly complicated the protective order timeline. It was a real obstacle, not a minor one. Aldrich handled it with the composed ferocity of someone who had expected it and had brought the appropriate tool. She had filed in a different venue. She had documentation from the social worker, from a physician who had reviewed photographs, from a financial forensics consultant who had spent 3 days going through accounts my daughter hadn't known existed in her own name, that had been used in ways that constituted, under Ohio law, financial abuse. The judge's connections worked better in one county than two. Donovan hired 2 attorneys. His father made calls. Vera gave a statement claiming I had forced my way into her home, threatened her, and removed property. My attorney filed the surveillance footage from a neighbor's Ring camera that showed in moderate resolution the entirety of my arrival at that house. The knock, the door opening, the conversation, the walk inside that any reasonable person could see was consented to. She also filed the voicemail, the 11 seconds of my daughter's voice at 2:47 in the morning, low and frightened, asking her father to come. The afternoon, the footage was entered into the record. Donovan's lead attorney requested a recess. They called with an offer the next morning. It was not a good offer. Aldrich laughed when she read it to me. Not cruelly, just with the professional amusement of someone who recognized a first draft when she saw one. She sent back a counter. There were 3 more rounds over 8 days. My daughter sat in on the last 2. She didn't say much. She mostly listened. But on the last day, when the other side's attorney said something about the mutual stresses of a young marriage, my daughter looked up from the table and said, in a voice that didn't shake at all, "I want that taken out of the agreement." It was taken out. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday morning in February. I drove her to the courthouse. She wore a gray coat and flat shoes, and she carried a coffee she'd bought herself from a drive-thru. We sat outside on a bench for a few minutes before she had to go in, and she leaned her head against my arm, the way she used to when she was small, when the world was made of things I could fix. I couldn't fix this one. I know that. Some things you can only be present for. She went in. I waited on the bench. When she came out 40 minutes later, she stood at the top of the steps and looked at me, and she almost smiled. Not happy, exactly. More like someone who had been holding their breath for a very long time and had finally been allowed to exhale. She walked down the steps, and I met her at the bottom. She said, "Can we get breakfast?" I said, "Wherever you want." We drove to a place she picked, a diner about 2 miles from the courthouse with red vinyl booths and a jukebox in the corner that still worked. She ordered eggs and toast and ate all of it. I had coffee and watched her eat and didn't say anything much and didn't need to. She put her fork down after a while and looked at me across the table. She said, "I'm sorry I didn't call you sooner." I said, "You called when you were ready." She shook her head slightly. I was scared. I kept thinking, if I made it a thing, if I pulled you into it. You were protecting me. I was. She looked at her plate. That was stupid. It wasn't stupid, I said. It was you. You've been taking care of people your whole life. Sometimes in the wrong direction, maybe, but that's not stupidity. That's just who you are. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm glad you didn't listen to her. That night, I'm glad you didn't just go home." I thought about the porch light coming on, the door opening 6 inches, Vera's face in the gap, composed and certain. I thought about standing in that hallway and understanding, in the part of me that is older than logic, that something was wrong in that house, had been wrong for a long time, and that if I walked back to my car, I might never find a door open again. I said, I wasn't going anywhere. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Outside the diner window, the February sky was grey and flat, and the parking lot was half empty, and a man in a heavy coat was walking a small dog that looked deeply unimpressed by the cold. Everything ordinary. Everything continuing. I turned my hand over and held onto hers. That was enough. I keep thinking about that lamp. The moment I turned it on in that dark bedroom and saw my daughter's face, that's the image I can't put down, not the confrontation at the door, not the police officers in the hallway, just that lamp and what it showed me, and the way she looked at me when she finally knew I was really there. There's something I've come to understand about the people who do what Vera did, what Donovan did. They count on the dark. staying dark. They count on the door staying closed. They arrange things very carefully, very patiently, so that the people who might help never get a clear view. Every move Vera made that night, from opening the door exactly 6 inches to those 5-timed minutes she gave me, was designed to keep the story hers. She had done the thinking ahead of time. She understood that control is rarely a lock on a door. More often it's just a presence in the room, a hand resting on a shoulder. What I didn't understand, until I sat in that hospital waiting room at 6 in the morning drinking bad coffee and staring at nothing, was that I had been part of the dark staying dark too. Not because I didn't love my daughter, because I hadn't looked closely enough. I had taken the version of the marriage she offered me at Sunday dinners and holiday calls, and I had accepted it. I hadn't asked the harder questions. There's a weight in that I'll carry for the rest of my life, and I think I should carry it, not as punishment, but as reminder. Love without attention is just intention. When my brother picked up the phone that morning, when Aldrich called me back at 11:40 and started asking her 14 quick questions, that's when I understood that doing the right thing isn't always the same as doing the first thing that feels right. I drove to that house on instinct and nearly made it worse. What actually got my daughter out wasn't a kicked-in door. It was a paper filed in the right venue. It was footage from a neighbor's camera. It was a social worker who knew which questions led somewhere. Caring for someone is not enough on its own. You have to be willing to learn how to care for them correctly, even when it's slower and harder and requires you to sit still when everything in you wants to move. And my daughter, I think about the night she described, 2 years of small erosions, of being told the world outside was too dangerous, of watching her own sense of herself get quieter and quieter. And still she found 11 seconds of clarity at 2:47 in the morning, and she made that call. That's not a small thing. That took something I'm not sure I fully have. She had been knocked down, in every sense of that phrase, and she still reached for the phone. That kind of endurance doesn't announce itself. It doesn't look like strength when it's happening. It looks like a woman, lying on top of a bedspread in her clothes, barely conscious, holding a phone in her hand, because some part of her hadn't given up yet. She asked me at breakfast if she had done the right thing by calling me. I didn't answer that directly. I just thought, she called. After all of it, she called. That was the thing that started everything else. Every right outcome in this story traces back to 11 seconds of her voice in the dark. I think about what I want to be at 63 with whatever time I have left. I want to be someone who looks closely, who asks the harder questions, who, when a door is closed, knocks, and keeps knocking until someone answers, or until the sun comes up. Not because I'm brave, because that's what it means to be present for the people you love, not just available. Present. She reached across that diner table and put her hand over mine. I turned my hand over and held on. That was the whole answer, right there.